If you want to know how strong your homebrewed beer, wine or cider is, or to understand whether it's finished fermenting and it's ready to be bottled or put in some other packaging, there are a few ways of doing that. But all of them rely on you knowing how much sugar was in the mixture at the start of fermentation, how much sugar is left in there at the end, and doing some maths to calculate the difference between the two and how much of that sugar has turned to alcohol. A few ways of doing that. This is my digital refractometer, which is my fancy method of doing it, but the traditional method of doing it is with a hydrometer. Now this is basically a density measurer that is a float, beautiful little glass float. The normal method of getting a sample and measuring it would be to sterilise a collection tube, something like this. You dip that in your wine or your beer while it's fermenting, so it'd all have to be completely sterilised to do that. And then you would float the hydrometer in it. And depending on how high or how low it rested in the mixture, that would tell you how much sugar is in there in terms of a gravity. You've got your original gravity, which is where it starts off, and then as it ferments and all that sugar turns to alcohol, it becomes less dense and it floats lower. And by reading off the original gravity versus the final gravity, you can calculate how much alcohol there is in your finished product. There's a bit of maths for doing that. The original gravity minus the final gravity divided by 7.45 gives you approximately the percentage alcohol by volume. So for example, starting gravity of 1050, final gravity of 1010 is a drop of 40 points divided by 7.45 gives you an alcohol by volume of about 5.36. So that's the normal way of doing it. One of those and one of those. So imagine my delight when I inherited this rather unusual piece of vintage brewware, which doesn't seem to have been used. And it was made and sold by Boots, not quite sure when, but it's a marvellous thing. It's a combined beer thief, so a way of getting a sample of liquid into there, and a hydrometer. So let me take it apart and show you. The squeezy bulb comes off, and inside there's a hydrometer. Let's start with that first, because that's a rather nice piece of kit. So, standard hydrometer with all your specific gravity markings on the side, and also a rough calculation for ounces of sugar per gallon. Now, the maths on that doesn't quite add up with modern brewing calculations, but it would be a very, very handy thing to have back in the day. And you can see at the top of the float, on top of the gravity measurements, there's a shaded area, which is the recommended gravity that you'd like things to drop to before you bottle your beer. So, in practice, you would very, very carefully, because this can drop out the bottom, assemble it all together, put it into your sample of beer or wine. Actually, what you probably want to do is use the bulb to draw some liquid up into it first and then drop the hydrometer in. But then that would bob around in there and you'd be able to read off the gravity. But that's not the clever thing. Well, it's one of the clever things. I mean, it's a combined unit, so you just sterilise this in the hydrometer and plop it into your liquid. But it has built-in scales on it, which are very handy. So your gravity points there, corresponding with the ounces of sugar per gallon. Now, as I've said, that doesn't really match up with modern brewery maths, but it's a nice thing to have. And for a home brewer in the 60s or 70s without ready access to a calculator, that would have been very handy. Over this side, though, is the neat thing. Gravity drop against alcohol by volume. So as we saw with our example earlier, if we'd got a starting gravity of that, final gravity of that, that's a drop of 40 points. So rather than having to do all that maths, you just take your before and after measurement, run down here and check. So we've got a gravity drop of 40 points, which gives us, about 5.4 ABV. So rather a lovely little thing, all made of glass. So you'd have to be quite careful with it. But as an all-in-one unit, for quickly measuring and calculating the strength or the status of your fermenting wine and beer, what a lovely thing.